What's up guys, hope everyone is doing well. In this video I'm going to be going over some updates for Bitcoin, but nonetheless to go ahead and get it started, first thing I want to go over is a 6-hour chart that I've been updating for quite some time at this point. Again, just to briefly go over what this is, we have this descending, broadening channel or wedge-like structure. We have Bitcoin hit around 50K right here, beginning of August. Ever since then it's been moving upwards. Finally broke this structure around late October, early November. Retested it at around 68, 69K ever since then, and has moved up to around 88K, and ever since then it's just been kind of wavering upwards, similar to like a flag in the wind. As I said, that I think it's quite likely that that would end up occurring. Said that sometime around right here when Bitcoin was somewhere around mid-November. So far it's continued to play out very similar to what I was saying. Before I get to further elaborating on that and comparing it to the prior impulse around 25K to 75K for Bitcoin, just want to point out this ascending support zone for the RSI where we see Bitcoin right in it. So will we further find support here? And going to the price, as you can see here, this current price support zone that I've had on here for, I don't know, roughly a week or so, maybe a bit longer. Currently the candles have already closed and are sitting right below it. But ultimately this could just be a quick deviation below, then it could just ultimately move back up and continue to go higher. So for right now, I'm going to hide these. I'm going to draw a new support zone. So starting from this wick of November 12th, connecting it to the wick of November 26th. I'm going to clone this one, and then we can move it up a bit to coincide with the candle close support here, November 15th, here around November 26th, 27th, and then here around December 3rd. Where we can see right now the price currently sits right in between this support zone. Clearly it's lower than the 3 to 4 supports that we see here in these portions of price, but nonetheless it still could, as I said, find some support here and continue to move towards the upside. If it starts to go below around 95.2 and then it starts to go around below around 92.3 and doesn't find support somewhere along this region right here, somewhere around like 88.3 to around like 90.6 thousand, then we could potentially see these further pullbacks, as I've been saying, to these vector zones here. So anywhere from around 79.4 up to around 84.5, or anywhere down as low as around approximately 69K to around 75, around 74.5K, potentially to retest even this ascending, or this descending, what was resistance that is so far right now at least flipped into support. Lastly, for this chart, I want to, again, just pull back up this prior price action during this. So this impulse right here would be the second impulse of the current Bitcoin bull market from $25,000 to $75,000 approximately. And if we just compare this, you can see that the way that the price is moving is insanely similar. You see this kind of like rough 95-degree tilt towards the upside. It's just kind of moving up and down within a specific range. And what's very interesting is you see this kind of like almost like a mound, like a rounded out hill, very similar to this right here during the prior impulse. And then even afterwards, we see this kind of quick, sharp inverted V. We saw something similar right here as well after this kind of mound formation. So I find it rather interesting. But ultimately, this is only going to continue to play out if Bitcoin can maintain this ascending structure right here. There is, if I connect using this wick back here to this drastic wick of around December 5th, we could potentially see the prices kind of deviate down a little bit further below the support zone while not going, having more of a substantial pullback down to these lower ranges, as I mentioned down here. So we could see, again, just maybe some movement towards roughly maybe around approximately 94K, then ultimately come back up and reclaim this support zone and then continue to move higher. But overall, it's still looking, I would say, eerily and uncoincidentally similar to the behavior of the prior impulse, which just really further resonates with the overall just repetitive, self-similar structure that you will many times find in Bitcoin, whether it's during bear markets or bull markets, as I've demonstrated in various videos on this channel in the past. Afterwards, one last thing I want to point out is that say Bitcoin continues to bounce here, it's going to be important for it to get back above this vector zone, so around 98.2 around 99.5 and continue just to waver upwards here. But if we do see this support zone held, then we can see that we're very similar in terms of time, roughly. So this price action back here wavered around 140 bars before we saw this impulse right here upwards, end of November, around 45K on the dot. And if we do take another time measurement here, you can see that we're at around 115 bars. So we're a little early. We could still, let's see, actually, if I take another measurement, just go out another little bit into the future, around 140 bars would take it to around December 17th. So only another week from now, we could basically see something like this to where we'll get a bounce here, kind of waver up, maybe come back down one more time leading into the 17th, and then see an impulse anywhere up towards, at highest approximately, upwards towards, I think 145K at highest. But in general, I think anywhere from around 115 to 145K, assuming things play out similar to what I'm going on about for this chart. And I keep saying lastly, but then as I'm going on about this, because I kind of free speak every single one of my videos, and then I remember something else that I want to go over for these charts when I'm talking about them. But I believe this is the last thing for the 6 hour. So if you look here at these Fibonacci retracements, we have one with respect to the first impulse, one with respect to the second impulse, and we can see right here that this wavering price action that I've been talking about and focusing on here, so we look compare it to the prior Fibonacci retracement, you can see that it came right up to the 1.272, just kept butting its head right here, and then eventually shot up to around roughly halfway between here, the 1.457 and 1.618. And if we actually compare this current impulse and then we backtrack it to this Fibonacci extension, you can see we've moved right up to the 1.272. Very similar again to what happened last time around. So if we do continue to see this play out very similar as we have so far, then like I said, we could see a move up to around the 1.457, which is around 122K, or maybe halfway above that, so somewhere around 133, 134K, perhaps even maybe seeing some wicks up to the 1.618, which is where that $145,000 comes into play. If we look here at this 2-day chart, again, what I wanted to point out here is if we look here, really kind of the same sentiment, just a higher time frame, further showing what I was going over on that 6 hour chart. I have the same Fibonacci retracements here, similar, we have this sideways horizontal from around 25 to 30K, then broke up to 75K. Then we have our descending, broadening channel, or wedge here. We then see our breakout. Again, we're sitting at the 1.272, just as it did back here the last time. But if we look here at the RSI, we can see it still looks very similar to this prior instance, just as it does now, but we are seeing the RSI go below the median of the Bollinger Bands, which didn't happen last time. Although I don't particularly see that as a doom and gloom sign. That would mean we potentially will see Bitcoin go potentially as low as around 69K, as I was further elaborated on that 6 hour chart. So, this could again be a brief cross here, and then RSI crosses back above and then ultimately starts moving back upwards and playing out something similar to, again, how it did back here. But if we do, again, take this time tool and go out just before this impulse that began around November 30th. You'll see it was 17 bars. We do the same thing here. And we can see that 17 bars again further points around the December 17th or 18th. So what we could be seeing here is just a very short, again, just to reiterate this, a brief crossing here on this RSI. It's not ultimately a significantly or just like kind of intermediate bearish sign that will take us down to anywhere from around roughly 94K to as low as 69K. Because if we zoom in here, you can see towards the end of this prior instance back here, there were 2 red candles, and eventually it resumed back towards the upside. And so far we've seen a little bit more red candles here, but we are further on in the maturation of this current bull market. Just every single second, every single moment that goes by, Bitcoin is becoming more mature. It's aging in terms of its price progression decaying over time, which factors into the lengthening of the cycles and the fact that the bull market's less bullish and the bear market's less bearish over time. So a lot of times you'll see, during this first instance back here, there was only 2 red candles, but so far we've seen 3, and we might see even more over the next, few weeks or so. But that really just kind of boils down to the fact that Bitcoin is in a drunken stagger, as Willie Woo, another Bitcoin analyst who's quite prominent, has put it in the past. Very similar, basically, him saying that is the same sentiment as me talking about the decay factor over time for Bitcoin. If you look here at this weekly chart, this pertains to the moving averages that I was going over in a previous recent video, where we see the 50 SMA as the yellow, the 50 EMA as the turquoise, the 200 SMA as the black, and the 200 EMA as the white. And I was just demonstrating in that video, where if you go all the way back in Bitcoin's history, you'll see each of these crosses. You'll see these specific crosses occurring that are insanely bullish for the price of Bitcoin. And zooming in here, this cross right here was already present in the past, the recent video, but this cross here of the 250s right here was not present. So this has happened. So this is just, double bullish at this point. Again, just to briefly show how this is historically bullish, we can see going back to, if we look here at the 200 pair, we can see there was a cross below, and then there's another cross below, above right here, right as Bitcoin's at the all-time highs. It then initiates the most parabolic phase of Bitcoin's bull markets. We saw the same thing right here as well. If I were to zoom in very, very closely, which I did in the prior video, there is a very, very brief cross right here, right as Bitcoin's just a little bit below the all-time highs, and then goes into its most parabolic portion of the bull market. And I believe we are seeing something very similar here, where we got the cross below, now we're seeing the cross back above, and then we're seeing the same thing here. We saw with the 50 pair, we see one cross, two, three, and then on the fourth parabolic phase, and we see here one cross, two, three, and then right now, just recently, four. So I think it's quite likely, at least more likely than not, we'll see the same thing happen. If we go back here, when we look at this prior cycle 2 of Bitcoin, we can see there's a cross here, and then the second cross, parabolic bull market, one cross here, two cross here, and then parabolic bull market. And then one of the things I pointed out when I was going over this was the fact that there's two crosses and then parabolic, two crosses, then parabolic. Then you fast forward, as now we're in cycle 3, we can see, as I pointed out, one cross, two, three, four, parabolic, one, two, three, four, parabolic, and it is doubled from the prior cycle. Again, another point which I or anybody really could use to validate or affirm the notion that as Bitcoin is progressing over time, it's maturing, and there's some sort of a decay factor that factors into the, like I said, the lengthening of cycles, phases, and the way that the bear markets and bull markets are changing over time. We look here at the 2 weekly chart with the pi cycle indicator, and before I get into going over it, these are the specific numbers that I use. So for the Bitcoin low long, 458, for the Bitcoin low short, 310, Bitcoin high long, 354, Bitcoin high short, 111. And if you wanted to utilize this, those are the inputs, where you can see that these precisely have going all the way back to April of 2013. So what this would be here is the first bull market peak of cycle 2, specifically the first peak of phase 1 of cycle 2, where we see the pi cycle high printed right at the precise candle. Fast forward to the second peak, so the end of phase 1 of cycle 2, again another precise pi cycle high printed. Then we go to here to the bear market of cycle 2's phase 2. Here again, very, not necessarily precise. There was this, prior 2 candles before this, a wick that went lower, but I believe this candle close here for the candle that it's pointing to for the pi cycle low was lower. But ultimately, I mean, as soon as Bitcoin hit this roughly around $230 right here, the beginning of February 2015, it just did nothing but go sideways within this range. So, and I mean, it honestly would have been better. It's better off that the pi cycle was printed here rather than here, because you would have, if it's printed here and you chose this to be a good sign and not a false positive pi cycle low indication, then you would have been able to accumulate during this entire accumulation period as Bitcoin went sideways, and then had what many consider to be the biggest run that Bitcoin had right here, where it just essentially did nothing but go up. Whereas this one back here, this bull market during phase 1 of cycle 2, did have this kind of intermediate, somewhat significant correction right here around June, or around April, May, June, and July, August of 2013. Again, so we see here around end of 2017 as Bitcoin's encroaching approximately 20K, another precise pi cycle indicator. This ends phase 2 of cycle 2, then begins phase 1 of cycle 3. Fast forward to this bear market bottom again, we see a precise pi cycle low indicated. Fast forward to here, the first peak of phase 1 of cycle 3, again another precise printing. Fast forward to the bottom here of the most recent bear market, another precise pi cycle low indicated, where again, this right here is the first peak of the bull market of phase 1, which means that this is structurally synonymous to going all the way back here to this first peak right here of phase 1 of cycle 2, and now we're just in cycle 3. Things clearly look a little bit different. Obviously, we still see ultimately the same structure though. We see a W here, sets the precedent for this entire bull market of phase 1. Fast forward to cycle 2's phase 1, we see again a W set here, and then sets the precedent for this entire bull market that Bitcoin has been in so far, which I think is going to culminate somewhere within a broader range of approximately 200K to 300K, specifically around 170 to around 230K, is I think a more reasonable, smaller and conservative range. And after this culminates, this current phase 1 of cycle 3 that we're on, we will then see phase 2 of cycle 3, which will then see a very similar structure, I think, as opposed to this structure right here of phase 2 of cycle 2, leading into around the end of this decade, maybe pushing 2032 roughly at latest, give or take a year. And then again, just to point it out, we have this descending resistance that the RSI has met every single time as well. So I think more likely than not, we'll see Bitcoin come back up to roughly where this trend is and then get some resistance here and then show a bearish divergence but show a bearish divergence with the price here. Its resistance is building up, whereas the RSI resistance here is building downwards, showing the indication of the upcoming bear market of phase 2 of cycle 2. And then lastly, on this 2-week chart, the only thing I want to point out is just on a higher time frame to further validate what I was talking about on the 6-hour and the 2-day, in terms of potentially, if we don't continue to see the mimicking of the prior impulse, so the second impulse of the current bull market from around 25K to 75K of Bitcoin, then I believe we will see a little bit more of a significant correction or pullback. And on this 2-weekly index chart, the only vector candle we have so far of the impulse from around 50K here up to where we are now locally at around 100, 304K, this entire vector zone encompasses around 79.5 all the way down to 66.5. So I think worst case scenario, or really it's just a best worst case scenario, because ultimately I still think it's going to go up and continue a bull market if it does retrace this low, then this is, I think, the range we will meet, which also does nicely and approximately coincide with this 1.618 of this phase 1 Fibonacci retracement that we can see here. But as I said, this is the last chart that I want to talk about, so as always, none of this is meant to be financial advice. But all that being said, and everything gone over, I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Ooh, I regret now.